But that was very interesting. We just came from a crew meeting where I found out that you were integral in the actual first exploration of this new redesign. Is that something that you can like tell us about? Like, how did that get started? What was all of that?
Uh, yeah, no, I mean, like I could totally go into that. Do you want me to do that at this exact moment?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay,
A
okay.
little warm up before the actual show.
Okay, cool. Yeah. No, actually, it's really cool. So, essentially, I was just told these are the screens that we're trying to redesign, and there's some particular goals, like making versions a little bit more obvious, was like one of the examples. And then I just kind of took a ton of stabs at what it could be and just tried to come up with really cool ideas that not only made the experience better and things more obvious, but were just like maybe unique so that it was like, ooh, I really want to use that, or I always love using that. And yeah, I think there was like numerous amounts of Loom videos that occurred between me and Palin. I would just like every day I would have like a 15-minute Loom describing all the things that I did and why, and then she would comment back, and it was just like that for probably the first 3 months or something like that.
I love that. That's so fun. The little quick shout out to Loom for being so integral to our redesign. Thank you very much. If
Totally.
you want to sponsor this shit, I'm just kidding. That's awesome. Very cool. Very cool. I love to see that. Is that like, have you done that before? Or is that more common on like remote teams? I guess like, because you've been in an office before, right? As a designer, like,
Have.
is that common or is that like more of a new thing? The Loom back and forths.
So actually, I tried to do that within the last, I'd say, new in the last like 2 to 2.5 years or
Uh huh.
so. I really tried to lean on Loom because it was like a really good way to get comments quickly and like describing things without like writing paragraphs of like stuff that might have made sense. I don't know. And so, yeah, it was relatively new, but I wouldn't have done it if I was in like an office environment.
There you go. You would have just like tapped on their shoulder, like, hey.
Right. We would have had an in-person Loom, right?
There you go. There you go. Amazing. Well, thank you so much. That was a fantastic intro. For everybody who's just joining us now, thank you so, so much. This is our very special edition of Design to Dev, where we are chatting with our very own Stacy, who happened to be our very first guest all the way back all those weeks ago. But today we are chatting specifically about our new redesign. We're very, if you want to maybe tell us who you are, what you do, and what your day to days looked like with this redesign. I know we sort of touched on it a little bit, but it would be great to hear more.
Sure. Yeah. Well, obviously, Stacy. I'm the product designer at Zeplin, or one of them. And yeah, I mean, like the day to day kind of varied, to be honest. It was, sometimes exploring ideas versus building out those ideas. And this last week was actually full of a bunch of summer breeze launch related things. So that was a lot of fun. But yeah, it's so varied. But every moment of it was so much fun, and I'm so excited to see what people think of the new launch.
Oh, good, good, good. There's a lot of controlled chaos or sometimes uncontrolled leading up to a product launch. So I think it's always fun to just like remember when you're in it of like, oh, okay, this is a fun feeling to think about. That's awesome. I'm glad that you had a
So,
good time. Speaking of, what have your favorite moments of this redesign been so far?
oh, I mean, we were just talking about some of the beginning parts of it. That I think that was like majority of like favorite chunks there for long extended periods of time. Obviously, like the whole thing, I found very enjoyable. I love a challenge, so. But yeah, just being able to do all those crazy explorations and think of all the different ways that you could or couldn't do something, and having to work with the restrictions that you have on like, oh yeah, we can't do that because of X. And then you have to go, okay, well now I got to think of something else. And all of that is just always a very fun challenge in it. And then communicating back and forth and doing all that was, I think, one of the best moments.
Awesome. I love that. And speaking of the actual redesign too, what feature do you think looks the best now, or maybe the most improved in your opinion?
Okay, yeah. It's apparently a lot of people agree with me, according to our crew meeting. But the the workspace, I think, just looks fantastic now, for multiple reasons. Really, it does feel very clean, and clear of what you're doing,
Mhm.
and a little maybe less distracting from some things that we were able to reduce down, and which I think really helped scanning through your projects. But also it took like the navigation and totally kind of changed it, but without really changing it. Like I'm sure there's a lot of work in the back end that I didn't do. But like design wise, there was like a kind of a restriction of like, hey, we can't totally change the navigation because that would be a huge lift. So it's like, what can we do to make it feel totally different and be a better experience? And what we landed on was pretty awesome, and I think it totally changed how it felt.
I love the approach of like, what can we do with what we have? And I think that always just creatively will put you in such a unique and interesting mindset of like, okay, you like, when you're limited on the actual resources that you have available, you're like, okay, how like you start thinking outside the box a lot more clearly too. So that's awesome that that carried through.
Totally.
Awesome. Is there maybe an area of the redesign that you wish that you could have spent more time on, or you would have gotten to, but quite didn't with this redesign?
Yeah, so I mean, like, partly navigation, but that was mostly because, like, in the beginning, the whole design crew had really cool ideas on how to navigate through, and it was just like, wow, that's cool, but that's a very large lift. Um, but outside of that particular thing, I think we didn't really get to touch too much on notifications. And I
Okay.
think that there's a lot of improvements that could be made there to make that just like really nice. And I'm hoping that that will be one of the next things that we follow up on. I know that we have a couple of bigger things that we're trying to get done with like style guides and stuff. So
Ooh.
I think it'll be there.
A little sneak peek and like a celebration all in one. This is fantastic.
Yes, yes.
I remember we have this one user, his name is Fernando, and on Twitter or X now, he used to go through and like tweet out all of the notifications that he had from Zeppelin, and it would be like 890 notifications. And he was like, "Well, guess it's gonna be a long week for me." And I just like so when you send notifications, I'm like, that's immediately what I think of. So that's awesome to hear that we're always in that continual improvement mindset. Is there question for you too? You had mentioned like one of the suggestions was maybe technically impossible for the like the navigation. Do you remember what it was, or is that something that like you can share with us? Because now I'm
uh,
curious. I'm like, what did that even look like?
yeah, so it was actually we were trying to think about how we could make the workspace feel, I guess, maybe a little bit more modern, if you will.
Okay.
And so a lot of apps that we were referring to for just thoughts and ideas turned out to have that classic left navigation where you click on something and it shows up in the right content area.
Uh,
And there was just the way that our particular setup was already in existence. It just, you couldn't just translate it into a left panel. There was a lot that had to go on in order to do that. And so that was the main driver of why we couldn't, because just changing all that would have taken a lot longer than the
yeah.
entire design process.
Awesome. Okay, good to know. It's funny when you first started saying that of like, oh, it wasn't technically possible. I was like, oh, is it like magic? Like, is there like some like like all of a sudden like it would have been like, do you remember those bad PowerPoint animations where the transitions between slides, it was like the pixels and then they all like blew off the stage and like came back onto. I was picturing something like that. But it's
No, oddly, I think that's more technically doable than the other option.
bring back PowerPoint transitions in your apps in 2024. Let's go. New design trend, I'm calling it.
Yes, sure.
Oh, I love that. I'm really excited to get to know too the more about the process behind it as well. So how closely did you work with development during this redesign, and what are some of the biggest lessons that you learned?
Yeah, so there was. quite a few instances where we had to reach out to a developer. There were quite a few, I think, that we had to ultimately talk to. So not a particular person, but and kind of decide like, hey, can we do this? Or, do we get this information from Figma to do this particular thing? And it was a lot of fun with the back and forth too, because like it would spark different thoughts and ideas because they might come back and say, we get this information from Figma specifically, and then I would personally be like, oh, I didn't even know we got that. Maybe we can do something with that. So it was really kind of eye-opening to know like all the data that you do or don't have. There's a lot of times where I thought, oh, for sure, we would get that, right? And they were like, oh no, we don't have that. Sorry.
That's great to know. It's good to know too. It's interesting that you mentioned that because we just recently interviewed a Zeppelin user for our blog, and one of the quotes that stuck out to me was like, "Collaboration with your developer only serves to enhance your productivity and your creativity." And I think that maybe taps into that a little bit as well of, knowing the technical limitations. It's sort of like that you're resource bound of like, okay, this is what I have. What can I do with that? And so that's amazing that it does carry through. That it's an important part of how you built it.
Totally. Yeah. I think a lot of people view that as like just limiting, or they're like, ugh,
Mm.
now I'm limited to what I can do. And it's like, in reality, if you ask the right questions, then you probably could spark more and make it more creative and less limiting.
Yeah, I love that. Just a quick little sidebar question for you. If you were going into thinking about your creative process, would you prefer to have like a specific set of guidelines or sort of like very minimal? Like, this is the project. We don't know what's going on. Like, where do you fall on that? I'm just curious about like you personally.
Ooh, I'm kind of I kind of like the thought of the whole ooh, do anything you want, but like that's also terrifying at the same time.
Yes.
So I think I'm more on the give me the guardrails, like when you're bowling. Give me
Yeah.
those little guardrails because I want to hit some pins here. I don't want to just like gutter ball it. Um, but yeah, it's like give me a little bit, and then that's perfect.
Yeah.
So if you tell me a baseline of we want this, like as a perfect example was, we're trying to make um, version history that we offer and version diff more obvious because that's something that's super helpful, and
Mhm.
apparently people were missing it, and so that's a perfect cue. That's just enough information for me to run with.
I love that. I love it. I love the bowling analogy too, because immediately you said that and I was like, oh, exactly. Like it would
Yeah.
be terrifying if it was like this, picturing a bowling lane, it's like 10 miles wide and you have to like hit the pins like 1 mile that way. You're like, what's going on?
Yes.
I love that. That's fantastic. And speaking of redesigns in general too, what's maybe one thing that you think every team needs to consider before attempting a redesign?
Yeah, so I definitely would say, like, obviously think about how you want it to be. But for sure, accessibility, I think, is like a huge one
Mm,
that maybe gets missed a lot because it is somewhat maybe, I don't know if I want to say limiting, but like time consuming to do properly.
mhm,
And so people often want to go, let's do that later. And in reality, I think that's like a huge one because contrast, text size, text color, all these things, the size of icons, button sizes, even the ARIA labels that are used, you could touch all that when you do a redesign because you're already going through
mm.
the code even too. And so it just kind of seems like the right way to do it, right? So that later you're not like, ah, crap, I got to touch all the code that we were just doing like 6 months ago. And yeah, and it's always the worst when it pops up and someone's like, hey, are you guys accessible? And you're like, I think so. Nope, no, we're not. And that becomes like a scramble of like, how do we
Yeah.
make it accessible?
Yeah, that's awesome. The Becky we had on Becky Specking. She's she's owns her own studio as well too, but she specializes in accessibility thinking,
Okay.
accessibility design, and she was saying very similar things of like incorporating this earlier is the easiest and the best thing that you can do to avoid that costly rework down the road. Because it's like, if you think it's a lot up front, imagine how much it's going to be down the road. Well, like you said, once you're like, we're already done, we've already bugged our developers 20 different times today to make these different changes, and then it's like, oh, just kidding, we've got a few more. um,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And it becomes a heavier lift, not so much on the designers per se, but more so on the developers aspect, because a lot of the times it's like the ARIA labels and the descriptions that are missing in these things that really come into play. So
Okay, good to know. Good to know. See, this is fantastic. This is why these conversations are so illuminating. I love to have them, so I appreciate your insight there. Also, speaking to for other teams, how do you know when it's time for a redesign?
that's a great question. I've never actually, by the way, had to make the call on when the when it was time. So my opinion on that really is I think it just kind of depends. A couple things that kind of came to mind were, if you're just looking to refresh your brand, then obviously good time. Let's
Hmm.
go ahead and do it. Refresh everything, start out clean. Maybe if it's just you have never redesigned, maybe that's a good time to be like, hey, we could use a modernization of our stuff. Um, and maybe it's just you're trying to touch all the code because you're reworking all of your flows and experience, and then maybe that's a good time to then consider the redesign since you're going through all the effort already.
Good to know. Good to know. So, have you always agreed with all of the redesigns that you've participated with in history, or have there been one like where you were like, oh, I don't know, like it seems pretty good as is, like, or have you ever thought that way and then been proven wrong afterwards? Like, I'm just curious about your experience
Um, Personally, I don't think I've ever been in a situation where I was like, we don't need that redesign.
there. There you go.
There might have been like one company that I was like, I think we're at a good point that like if you redesigned, it would be like just like a icing on the cake kind of
Mm-hmm.
scenario. But like I could see why they'd want to do it. But most of the time, the companies I've worked for have started on something and then added a ton of things to it and never really worried about the aesthetic of the just everything and the modernization of everything and the experience. And so then it's like, yeah, you probably need it. Like maybe a little bit. And then it turned out great though, because then the before and after is like, whoa.
That's what I'm so excited too. We were here on social. We were like sharing all the screenshots of how Zeppelin used to look and all these things. And it's interesting because there's always been a very core like way that Zeppelin's been designed, and it's very familiar to everybody. And I think the beautiful thing about the new redesign is that it keeps that familiarity, but it just like brings it to a new level. So it's amazing to see that. I really hope that people do take a look at like, oh, this is really fun. This is fresh, but I can still find everything, and this is fantastic. And I think that that's great because there have been times where like an update gets pushed up to an app I use frequently, and then I'm like, I have no idea where anything is, and it's going to take me like 20 minutes to find everything again. Um,
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. That's good to know because we've heard that too through user testing, and that familiar was one of the
mm.
keywords that was used a lot, and that was actually one of the kind of key things to keep in mind with our redesign. So I'm glad that it worked.
I love it. I love it. Speaking of, past redesigns, could you point to maybe like a favorite redesign that you've ever witnessed, or it doesn't have to be a part of, but like maybe one of your favorite redesigns ever? What is it? What would you pick?
Well, okay, so yeah, the first one that had come to mind was I'm an Android fan. A lot of designers aren't, surprisingly,
Yeah.
or maybe not
I was
surprisingly.
like, how brave of you to admit this here on live television.
And I'm okay with it. Do you lose out on some things? Sure, but like, it's totally cool.
Of course.
Um, no, but Google, I think, did a really great job in the beginning. I honestly would classify Android as being ugly aesthetically wise.
Mhm.
It was more utilitarian, like, hey, look how much you can do with your phone.
Yes. Yes.
Right, like that's for the nerdy people that
Uh-huh.
are like really want to dig into like what their phone can do and customize it, which was totally amazing. And then we got material design, which I personally, when I saw that, I was like, ooh, I love the thought that went behind that. It's really cool. They had like a whole thing on how like light and paper and all this stuff, and it turned out really cool and felt very modern and definitely could compete with iOS at the time.
Yeah.
And then now we have this, like, it morphed even further, and it's like this very clean kind of flat look. And it used to have a lot of shadows, and I think it still does use some shadows, just they're maybe a little bit more subtle,
Okay.
and less use of color to dictate like headers, maybe. I
Oh.
think it's a lot of white on white I'm seeing now, though.
Oh wow. Okay.
Um, so at least in the things that I'm using. I'm probably saying this and people are like, what are you talking about?
You represent like 0.0004% of
Correct,
users.
right. You're like, you're not a true Android fan. Um, but the same problem actually came up though that you were just talking about, which was like now they're constantly updating it, which is cool. But then I think the other day I was using it and I was like, oh my God, why did you change that?
Yes. Yes.
It was something simple too. It's like being able to like respond to a particular message in the text. And
Uh-huh.
like I can't even now remember what the action was, but it was very simple. And then it was taken away, and I was like, "Oh my God, what did you? Why? Why did you do that?" And then suddenly it was back, and I was like, "Why? What? When did it come back?" They like just do it and don't tell you. So
I think that should be the new standard for how to collect user feedback on updates is like if you change anything, immediately have a button to like record a loom or record a video. That's like just you shouting at your phone, like, where did this go? Why can't I do this anymore? And that might help. So who knows? Maybe we'll see
totally,
that here with Zeppelin.
I think it will.
I have now possibly our spiciest question for you this whole session. But what is a website or a product that you think is actually due for a redesign?
Okay, so yeah, this one, that's a spicy question. Um, and not to call anyone in particular out here. No, actually, I'm also a car fan, but like from a design perspective, not from like a engine and power perspective. So don't ask me car questions. I don't know them. Um, but I think that like the car infotainment system, it
Mm,
got better. We now have touchscreens, um,
yes.
and more than Bluetooth, so that's cool. But outside of hooking your phone up for like CarPlay and Android Auto, it is seriously lacking some love.
Yeah.
It's always like this like weird utilitarian feel of just like, yeah, we're gonna get the job done, but we're gonna make it really hard because of course while you're driving you need this to be difficult. Um, it seems perfect. But like it's kind of terrible, and they show it too with like electric vehicles like Tesla and stuff,
Mm-hmm.
where while also not great that everything is in a screen in my personal opinion, because like looking again to touch things,
Yes.
not great. um the it just proves how horrible the like regular car infotainment systems are right now. And even my newest car, it's like mediocre. It's all right.
Uh-huh.
But my other half has a Ford, and boy, does that one looks very, it's functional. It's
Uh-huh.
great. It just I wish that like they updated the design a little bit. So it's, I can't argue though. For a function over form. So it
There
is
you
what it
go.
is, but maybe we'll get there one day.
Yeah, maybe. It does feel like we have progressed just in general because I remember it used to feel like you were trying to like change the clock on an oven every time you went to go try to get to your settings in a car before like touchscreens and stuff. So it's
Totally.
good to hear that there's been some improvements. I'm excited about that. Well, thank you very much. That was a fantastic interview section. And we are now moving into a little rapid fire section before we finish out with our favorite activity. So you think you're a designer. The first questions that I have for you here, though, there's just a few. If you had to guess, how many new components would you say that your crew built?
Actually, I sort of cheated on this one, and I actually I looked up how many how many components we had, at least in our design system file.
Yeah.
So the rough guesstimate on that one then is 1,425 total components within our design system.
Okay.
So I'm going with it. That's the number.
That's amazing. It would have been so funny if you had said without even guessing, and then Palin commented and was like, "How did you know?" Like that's exactly right.
Darn, missed
Yeah,
opportunity.
like one of those like guess how many gumballs are in the jar.
Oh
Um,
yeah, I was terrible at those. So bad.
so like it's either 10 or 100,000. I'm
Right.
genuinely not sure. Um, I love that. If you could describe the Zeppelin Summer Breeze update in just 3 words, what would those 3 words be?
That one's super easy, because I would definitely go clean, simple, and bright. Unless you're in dark mode, then clean, simple, and bright.
I like that. I appreciate that. The little the word, I don't even know the word swap that you did was fantastic. So thank you for that. That was a very clever answer. Who did you work with the most on this redesign?
See, now I wish I would have had like a tally just to figure it out, but I'm assuming that I've worked the most with Palin in this whole process of the redesign. And that's mostly because of the like months stretch of like daily having a loom conversation
Yeah.
back and forth, and just always like touching points on those things. And so that's probably, if I was counting the number of times, Palin would have reached the top on that one for sure.
I love it. I love it. And my very last question for you two is if you had to pick a new name for the release instead of Zeppelin Summer Breeze release, what would it be?
Oh, right. So I'm not a marketer, but I probably would have gone with something like airship or Zeppelin airship because like that's
Okay.
literally what it is.
Yeah.
Also maybe like elemental. And that's just
Oh,
playing on the whole like the foundation of a Zeppelin airship literally is either helium or hydrogen to
mhm.
get it to float and fly. And so the foundation of our stuff was kind of like elements, which would be like components and design system. And so it kind of felt like, if those elements build the product,
Yeah.
and that's kind of like that. So
Look at that double entendre. That's fantastic. That's a wonderful name. You've got a little part-time career as a marketer or a little copywriter if you want. That was beautiful. Thank you very much. And we do have one question before we get to our final activity from the audience. It's from
okay.
Connor. He mentioned, how does feedback from users come into play when doing a redesign?
Oh, actually, it definitely does have a come into play for sure. So I have a great example. We'd done some user testing, and it was over our new workspace view,
Okay.
and we did like a kind of like a prototype version, and so we made it look nice and pretty. And the everyone that saw it was like, "Oh, I love how like the thumbnails look. They're so organized." And so just hearing that every single person said something about that, I was like, okay, well, clearly they care about organization, and the fact that the thumbnail looks organized, that's something. And so we actually had a conversation as a design team. And we're like, I think we should make a template for thumbnails, so that it just automatically looks
Ooh.
nice and clean when you do it. And that actually just went right into the process, and we just added it in, and that you see it now in the
I
new launch.
it does look so good. It looks very, very clean. That's really cool to hear like the origin story of that too.
Yeah,
It does look amazing. Because it's like it just like what does it auto take one of the first screens that you import into the project or something and
that's correct.
stylize it? Okay. Oh,
Yeah.
awesome. Oh my gosh, beautiful. I love it. I love it. It does look very good. If you haven't seen it yet, head over to app.zeppelin.io and you will see. Um, but that brings us to our very final portion of this, which is my favorite portion of these interviews. It's called So You Think You're a Designer. And in the spirit of the redesign and everything, we will have you redesign the Zeppelin logo using Microsoft Paint in just 2 minutes. So we'll see if you can match what you did on your very first time. If you can do better than you did your very first time, I'm very excited to see the progression here.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I don't know if I'm gonna do better. But we'll give it a whirl. All right. Okay. Let's go here and then
Perfect.
oh, I know I need to there is
Wonderful. Yeah,
full
and then
screen. Nope, that was the wrong button.
you're all good. It's the zoom and then like large window or zoom to
Okay.
large
Let me
window.
go back out of full screen here. Okay. So zoom, there it is. Let me see. Uh, Large screen. Oh
Oh,
wow.
look at the canvas you have. Look at
That
that.
is a
That's
massive
beautiful.
canvas. All right, cool.
All right. And as soon as your pen hits the screen, as soon as the first pixel is laid, your time will begin.
Ooh, okay. I think I'm going the same route I did last time. So
All
here we
right.
go. Here we go.
Let's do it.
Oh, that
Perfect.
is pixelated.
It might be because of how blown up the canvas is.
Probably. I mean, it feels more accurate to Microsoft Paint this way. So
There you go. A little nostalgia play here.
a
This
little
is already
bit,
starting
yeah.
off strong.
This is it. Looks kind of weird. Not gonna lie.
You've got a minute 30 left, so you're doing good on time. We do have one comment from Palin who mentioned that it was amazing to work so closely with you and sending you lots of hugs.
Well, it was a fantastic time. I very much enjoyed it. So always good to hear.
There you go. Look at that. Design to dev, bringing real-time connections. This is beautiful. Oh, and you're going with the paint fill. This is good.
Oh, oh, do I have time to make a custom color? Who
Of
knows?
course you do. You've got a minute left.
Okay. Ooh, there it is.
Ooh.
Ooh, I like it. All
Yeah.
right. Okay. All right.
This is good. This is
These
I
are not.
love
Oh
this.
no, that was a bad choice.
That's all right. I appreciate it. It looks good.
Okay. All right. Now I can't remember what the logo looks like. I'm just so distracted. All right. It's fine. Okay. There we go. One, and then the other. Nailed it. Okay.
And you officially have
Wait.
30 seconds left.
30 seconds. Okay. Let me just add a outline on this side here. Very carefully. It's actually working out much better than I thought it
Yeah,
would.
wow. Your hand is like very
Impressive.
still.
Impressive. The best I've ever done. That was great. Okay.
That is perfect. In 10 more seconds. So if you want to add any
10
last
more
little bits of
seconds.
flair, bobs and bits,
Oh,
now's your
oh,
time.
wait. Yeah, I want to make this thicker. Ooh,
Ooh. Ah. And
nailed
that
it.
is exactly time. That was I'd like to give a round of applause for that. That was a beautiful drawing. Thank you very much. I'm excited to put them side by side. I can't wait to see the progression, not
Oh,
only in Zeppelin's UI, but in your depiction of the Zeppelin logo. This will be fantastic. Um,
oh,
so thank you very much. Well, that brings us to the end of our program here today. I wanted to thank you so much, Stacey, for sharing all of your thoughts on the Zeppelin redesign, on redesigns in general, sharing your tips and tricks. It was fantastic to get to know you a little bit better, and I really appreciate your time. So thank you so much.
thank you. It was great talking to you.
All right. Well, on that note, we hope everybody has a chance to check out the new Zeppelin, the Summer Breeze release. If you need more information or details on it, please check out our main social profiles. All the posts are pinned that you need to know. And then check out our blog too. Our blog has some fantastic updates from Palin and the crew. So please check that out and let us know what you think. We're eagerly waiting to hear what you think and what you love about
Definitely.
it too. So let us know. Well, on that note, thank you so much. Happy Summer Breeze release day to everybody out there. And we will talk to you soon.
Bye.
Take care.